Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/PettyRevenge, where in this episode, entitled people are getting taught lessons left and right. And OP tells a tale about their super duper nightmare Karen neighbor, and the revenge is really unique and so satisfying. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Don't shake your heads too hard, and remember, you can send or link stories to this email right here. So I live on a street connected to an elementary school. Other residents, including myself, have issues on the weekdays around 3:30 because parents will be parked along the street to go pick up their kids from the school. Now, there's no problem with that, as I expect it. We have a guy named Terry on our street. Terry had left all the neighbors a business card saying that if any people block their driveway, to call him immediately, and he would tow them right away. He's basically on standby from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. in our neighborhood. I never had a chance to use the card yet. The only issue for me is that I finish work at 2 p.m., and I go get groceries and usually end up home around 3:30 p.m. A few times now, I've come home from work to park in my driveway, and there's a car completely blocking me. Instead of parking the street parking, aka curb, they will park at the end of my driveway and make it unable for me to access it. So I have to ask the owners to move. Today specifically, there was an old Dodge minivan blocking my driveway. When I got out of my car to knock on the tinted window, I realized that no one was inside, and I thought maybe they're napping in the back while they wait. No one was inside the vehicle, and I couldn't get onto my driveway. Now this is specifically annoying because the curb behind and in front of him were both vacant. So I got the card out of my glove compartment and I called Terry. I gave Terry my house number, and in less than 5 minutes, he had that bad boy towed out of there. So what happened next? I decided to start cleaning my car on the driveway until the owner came by. My first plan was to tell the owner that he or she had blocked my driveway, so I had it towed. But as I was outside cleaning my car, I saw him coming back with his son. The guy looks incredibly confused as I was cleaning my car. I noticed him and I didn't say anything as he was on his phone. The guy actually came to me really upset and he says, "Hey pal, have you seen my van? Are you that much of an effing a-hole to have it towed when I was gone for 3 minutes? 3 effing minutes?" So with that, my plan changed. I said, "Wait, what van?" And I decided to play dumb. Well, about an hour later, he rings my doorbell and asks for details. I told him to F off, and then came here to write this. Meanwhile, Terry's back in his driveway with a tow truck though, and I plan on giving him a 6-pack of beer for helping me. So even though I've read numerous stories about entitled people parking on or blocking people's driveways, I still get a smile on my face every single time these idiots get towed, guys. Like, it boggles my mind that people would think that blocking or parking on someone's driveway is okay, especially if there's street parking. And while we're on the topic of drivers not respecting others, guys, listen to this next story. So on this day, I popped into a supermarket on the way home for food. And as I positioned myself to back into a space, I noticed a parking space where not one, but 2 cars had taken it upon themselves to park overhanging their lines to deter people from parking next to their precious vehicles. Well, for most people, they would have chuntered something about terrible parking and then moved on with their lives, but not me. I drive a relatively small car, the perfect size to fit between the 2 cars with, I kid you not, a centimeter to spare on either side. Now it did take me a solid couple of minutes to inch my way into the space as to not touch either vehicle, but I eventually got myself in. Now, being quite slim and relatively flexible, I was able to climb out of my window, onto my roof, and slide down the back of my car. Feeling happy with myself, I queued up to pay for my items, hoping the bad parkers had gotten their just desserts, and that's when I saw them. Through the window by the checkouts, the occupants of both vehicles were pacing around theirs and my vehicle, occasionally throwing their hands in the air, screaming what kind of idiot would park like this. And I'm thinking, really? It was one couple and one family trying to figure out how to get inside their cars. Grinning from ear to ear, I watched as the father of the family is able to back his car out to let the rest of the family in. Meanwhile, the other vehicle had their driver's side millimeters away from my passenger's side. After paying, I hastily walk out as to not miss anything. And the woman of the couple, apparently the driver, is yelling at her partner about how is she supposed to get in, and who the heck is this idiot that would park so close to her when there's loads of other spots. I walk closer to my car, and she clues in that I'm the person causing all of this stress. Trying to hide my Cheshire smile, she starts yelling at me for parking so close, and that's when I reply that I'm within my lines and it's you that's too close to me. The man of the couple has been silent, as I believe he's secretly on my side, and he's trying to calm the woman down, while she's screaming, "How the heck am I supposed to get in?" Now, I do want to note that she was a plus-size woman, and she had no hope of crawling over the passenger seat, let alone through the trunk for my American friends. And that's when I say out loud, hey, I have no idea, but try parking with consideration for others next time, and maybe you won't find yourself in this predicament again. With that, I hopped in my now easy-to-access driver's side with the intention of driving away. However, my phone rang, and it was a call I genuinely had to take. Perfect timing, nonetheless. So I sat there talking to a colleague, taking my time as the woman starts yelling at her man about how he should do something. He continued to try to calm her down, and my call ended. I felt like staying there for longer, but it's Friday and I want to get home too. Now, for some, this is nothing, but for me, who's very non-confrontational, I found this to be a very satisfying way to get my point across to these entitled drivers. Road rage is dangerous and irresponsible, so I find this to be a good alternative. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have seen little petty revenges on entitled drivers, right? So this is nothing new. And Opie does share a picture of how they parked, and when they say it was a tight squeeze, oh boy guys, it was a frickin' tight squeeze. And I'm actually amazed that Opie was able to squeeze out of there. So first, here's some background. I have seriously stinky farts. I'm talking face-melting, mind-rending, nightmare-inducing smells. It's gas that'll make you question your belief or confirm your doubt in the existence of a loving God. Now, it's not lactose intolerance, gluten intolerance, celiac, Crohn's, anything serious like that. I just have extra funky gut bacteria that enjoy turning anything I eat into noxious, creeping clouds of ass death. With that said, I generally try to use my power responsibly. I'll often excuse myself from the room, warn others to avoid ground zero after a bomb's been detonated, or even stick my butt out of a door or window if the situation requires. But I'm also not above using my gas to go off on the offensive against those that deserve it. And this is what this story's about. This past Saturday, my husband, his brother, my sister and I went out for lunch. Now, I won't go through the rather convoluted circumstances that brought the group together, but it wasn't exactly a pairing of choice. My husband's brother Chad is basically a walking caricature of an immature, extremely online dude bro, who approximates having a personality by acting like an in-real-life Twitter troll. My husband and I try to spend very little time with him, while my poor sister was getting her first extended exposure to him and definitely wasn't enjoying it. For reasons that'll become apparent, I'll note that Chad was driving. He's got a brand new car that he's very protective of. Anyways, on our way back from the restaurant, we went for Vietnamese. We passed by a small protest against the Roe opinion. Naturally, that's Chad's cue to chime in with the most repulsive take imaginable. Chad screeches, "Holy, nobody cares. You C-words need to get an effing life already." Hearing him say that, my husband shakes his head and says, "Dude, you're such an a-hole," while my sister lets out an exaggerated sigh. And I'm ready to go on a rant that would have left him crying, but then I felt a slight bubbling in my tummy, and I had an even better idea. You see, while my farts are awful no matter what I eat, there are certain foods that take them to a whole nother level of putridity. And it just so happens that Vietnamese noodle soup, which I had at lunch, is near the top of the list. Now, I'm not sure why, but my gut's grotesque alchemy never fails to turn those tiny bowls of noodles, beef, and broth into my very own organic nerve gas. And let me tell you, I'd normally never consider unleashing that kind of horror in an enclosed space, but this was my chance to ruin Chad's afternoon, so I had to take it. So with a discreet lift of a cheek and a slight flex of my ab muscles, I let it go like Elsa, and I knew right away that it was gonna be all I'd bargained for and then some. It was 4 seconds of silent steam that instantly warmed the car seat to 100 degrees Celsius. I then cleared my throat and declared calmly and confidently, "I am so sorry." My husband and sister recognized this as my code phrase, used whenever I drop the hammer in the company of others, and it naturally sends them into a panic. They both start jamming at the window controls, only to find that they were locked in Chad's car. My husband then told Chad to open the windows, and he says, "Nah dude, it's raining." To which my husband says with urgency, "No, seriously dude, open the effing windows right now." With that, Chad holds firm and says, Are you serious? It's raining. I'm not getting the leather wet. Do you know how expensive my car is? Blah, blah, blah. And it was at that point, fatalism set in. My sister pulls her scarf over her nose, and my husband wraps his arm around his face like an 8-year-old playing Dracula. And Chad drove along oblivious. And then the stink tsunami that I had sent rolling through the atmosphere crested and crashed. And as Chad did not take any precautionary measures, he was the first to react. Chad emits a guttural, animalistic cry of anguish, and he begins coughing, screaming, "Ugh, what the F? What the F is that smell?" And I was more than happy to take responsibility for this one. I said, "Excuse me, I farted. That was my choice." Chad tried to respond, but he was struggling way too much to breathe to get the words out. The windows went down, but it was way too late for that to do any good. And then Chad pulls over. I think the car was still moving when he practically jumps out of it. As he stood there in the rain, cursing me out, calling me a disgusting bitch, saying the smell is effing inhuman and women shouldn't do that, I just smiled and smiled. Now, I may not have solved anything, but damn, it felt good to fight back. Even after he got in the car, he was complaining that it still stunk. And honestly, I hope it still does. For weeks. My freaking goodness, guys. This is the pettiness I look for when reading these stories. And seriously, I can't even begin to imagine the stench of that at that moment. And I feel so bad that OP's husband and her sister got caught in the crossfire. This person shares their comment and says, "I used to fart in empty water bottles when I was a kid and save them to weaponize. You may be a candidate for a nuclear one. Some of you are wild. That's all I can say." I'm a 31-year-old female, and I had a very weird group of friends in high school. The "if you have friends like this, you don't need enemies" kind. So one of these girls was named Julia. She treated me horribly, but in the same breath, she would call me her best friend, without letting me really have a say in the matter. She would rip me to shreds behind my back, make up rumors about me, and in hindsight, this was all dumb 14-year-old girly stuff, but at the time, it truly hurt me a lot. Julia had to repeat her grade and then change schools, and I cut the friendship off right there. She still had friends at my school though, so the rumors continued for years. Even up to my mid-20s, I would hear from people, "Oh, weren't you the girl who slept with so-and-so?" Even though I was the most boring, introverted high schooler ever. This weekend, I was back in my hometown, and I attended an event with some friends, none of which I went to high school with. We were all standing at a table drinking wine and enjoying the sun when one of my friends points out that a neighboring table kept looking at me. I looked over and it was Julia and a whole bunch of other women, quickly turning their heads away. They'd been looking me up and down and clearly gossiping. Now, I'm not currently in my best phase. I've gained some weight, and I was dressed cute, but sloppily, and I was disheveled and sweaty. I felt self-conscious, obviously, and this wasn't how I wanted to meet a person I had so much bad history with. But with that said, I'm not that boring, introverted high schooler anymore. Nowadays, I'm more outspoken, opinionated, and a bit mischievous when the occasion arises. So I decided it was time to stretch my acting muscles and be petty for once. I walked over to the table, all question marks and a polite smile saying, "Hi, I saw you looking. Can I help you with anything?" Now, I didn't say that sarcastically. I was genuinely being polite. The women look surprised, and then one of them points at Julia and says, "Oh, no, Julia here said you used to go to the same school with her?" I then looked Julia right in her face and said super excitedly, "Oh, really? The Montessori school?" And with that, Julia looked really put off. Her face was super scrunched up, and she replied confused, "No." Now listen, I'm not an actress, but I know I pulled this off perfectly. I then made a surprised, then pensive face and said, "Oh, and your name is?" And I could tell Julia was getting irritated. She said her name, and then I thought for a second, and then apologized and said, "Oh my goodness, this is so embarrassing. I really can't place you. How long were we in class together?" She replied, "Until the 8th grade," and she looked so uncomfortable at that. Julia was looking at my face like she clearly wanted to say more, but couldn't tell if I'd really remember her. It was glorious. Meanwhile, I was acting my butt off, sort of smiling apologetically saying, "Boy, I'm so sorry, that was nearly 17 years ago. But hey, please don't take it personally. I really only remember the names of people that I was friends with back then." The other women were sort of chuckling uncomfortably, and that's when one of her friends said, "Oh yeah, that happens to me all the time too. I can never place former classmates." We were all laughing a little, and then Julia throws in, "We were friends." I tried to laugh at her at that point, but I kept it in and sort of shrugged it off and said, "I'm so sorry, I really don't recall, but hey, it was nice seeing you again. I hope you ladies have a nice rest of the evening." And the look on her face when I turned away was priceless. I'll dream about that for years. I could tell her other friends didn't really think much about the whole interaction, but Julia was clearly embarrassed. I made sure to wink at her when she passed to leave the event. Guys, all I can say is that was cold and well deserved. I really only remember the names of people I was friends with back then. My goodness, OP was freaking savage. But hey, you know what they say, guys, what goes around comes around, and I'm glad OP got the last laugh. Alright, so this is the most satisfying act of revenge that I ever got on a nasty neighbor. We had moved into a trailer park just before my first child was born. My next door neighbor, let's call her Karen, was a foul-tempered old lady who hated everyone. The woman was entitled, and she felt she was better than everyone, and she lived alone, for a good reason. Her son lived not far away, but he rarely visited her because they were semi-estranged. Now, I didn't meet Karen right away because I'm a loner myself, and I was having a difficult pregnancy, and then after the baby was born, I rarely left the house for several months. The only time I saw her was when she was outside tending her flowers, which were numerous and beautiful. And whenever she would see me, she would give me the evil eye, telling me to stay away from her property or she would call police. Finally, I began to get out when my baby was learning to walk. He had a fascination with stairs, so I'd let him climb them whenever he wanted. We had stairs on our front porch, so he got plenty of practice. One day, we'd been walking in the neighborhood and we were almost home when he saw Karen's steps and made a beeline for them. I hadn't seen Karen that day, so I figured it'd be no problem to let him climb to the top before going inside our house. But the minute he touches her steps, she was at the door. Karen must have been watching us out the window, and she screams, "Hey, get your kid off my property. He has no right trespassing here. I'm calling police right now." Hearing her say that, I was taken aback and embarrassed. And poor Alex looked so scared at her mean face and cried. I picked him up and said, "I'm so sorry, it won't happen again," and quickly retreated to my house. Not long after, an officer comes to my door. It turns out that this old woman actually called the police on me. Thankfully, the officer was a nice guy, and he told me he's just giving me a warning to not go on her property because the last thing he wanted to do was write me a ticket. I tried to explain my side of the story, that the woman's crazy, that she was lying, but he told me it's just a friendly warning, that nothing bad is happening, so it's just best to comply to her wishes and not bug her anymore, for the sake of everybody. He then laughed and says he's come by a few times as she's called police on her previous neighbors. And we talked a bit, and he told me that apparently she's known for causing trouble and she thinks she runs the whole trailer park. I was angry. She yelled at my poor innocent baby, made him cry, and then called the cops on me for the dumbest reason, and we were stuck living next to her indefinitely, and it really upset me that she was sending such negative energy our way for no reason. I made up my mind right then and there that I was gonna neutralize this threat if it was the last thing I did, so I hatched my plan of revenge. I didn't care how long it took, I was gonna play the long game. My family was gonna come out on top in this situation. I left no room for failure. The next time I saw her tending her garden, I went outside on the porch and said, "Hey, your name is Karen, right? I'm so-and-so. You met my son the other day. My son's named Alex." The woman just glares at me, asking if I want the cops at the door again. I ignored her and said, "My husband's name is Jerry. He's in the Navy." Still no words, just a baleful stare, and that's when I tell her, "You have such a beautiful garden. It's a joy living next to it. What's that one called?" I said while pointing. Karen looks at me and says, "You don't know what an iris is?" I tell her, "Well, I've seen them before, but I didn't know what they were called." She then turned her back, mumbling how people don't learn, and went back inside. So on with my revenge. Every time I saw her outside, I would pop my head out the door and say, "Hi Karen, it's a beautiful day, huh?" Or, "Good morning Karen, I can smell your geraniums from here." After several weeks of this, she starts talking to me, mostly to complain about how horrible her other neighbors were, how her son didn't care if she lived or died, and her daughter-in-law was a rancid witch. She also opened up about her many medical problems that kept her miserable, etc. I just responded with, "Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. That must be really hard to take. You must get lonely and scared sometimes." More time went by and she starts talking about her flowers, what they were called, the stories behind them, how long the irises had been established, which colors were rarest, etc. Eventually, I figured the time was right to move to the next part of my plan. I chose a time when I knew she was home. By this time, I was expecting my next child. I took my son to her porch and let him climb the steps, and I was right behind him. As soon as he makes it up 2 steps, Karen's front door flies open, and there she stood with a face like thunder. And that's when my boy holds out a plate full of cookies, and I said, "Hey, my son and I baked these for you this morning. I hope you like the sweets." And poor Karen looked utterly confused, but she hesitantly took the plate. I then say to her, "I'm sorry we can't stay and chat, but I've got some errands to run. See you later." A few days later, Alex and I went to retrieve our plate. Karen opens the door, with our plate in one hand and a half-eaten bag of tortilla chips in the other hand, and she handed it to us. She greeted Alex warmly, and he smiled at her. The chips turned out to be stale, but it's the thought that counts, right? So as time went on, we were soon happily chatting over the fence, and Karen was giving us little presents here and there. She then started inviting us inside. She learned to love Alex, and she was very excited about the birth of my daughter Mariah. You see, my mother told me before I ever had a child that she wanted nothing to do with any child that I might ever have. My husband's parents were terrible people, and they lived thousands of miles away, so my kids had no grandparents. Now, because Karen had been such a difficult person in her life, her son stayed away, her daughter-in-law detested her, and she'd rarely seen her grandkids and had no relationship with them. I'm happy to say that she became my kids' grandma, and they became her reason to smile. My little revenge was complete. It had taken over a year from when I started, but in the end, I had destroyed the mean old lady and set a loving grandma in her place. Little did she know, she helped me remove the threat to my family's well-being by being willing to open her heart. She was loved by my family, and she felt loved by us for the rest of her days. Guys, I love it when people play the long game to get their revenge, and I really love how this story started terribly and ended so wholesome. And let me tell ya, we need more people like OP in this world. Because instead of fighting hate with hate and trying to destroy this mean Karen, she took the high road, and I'm glad it worked out for both of them. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /PettyRevenge. Guys, if you enjoyed the stories today, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, I'm gonna link it right here. An entitled Karen trespasses to steal OP's cat, and she learns a lesson that she won't forget. Guys, if you haven't heard the story, go check it out, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.